The start of the universe, scientific and Quranic perspective. In modern cosmology, the scientific explanation for the beginning of the universe is centered on the Big Bang model, which states that the universe began approximately 13.8 billion years ago from an extremely hot, dense, and compact state, where space and time themselves emerged and began expanding, not as matter exploding in empty space, but as space itself stretching everywhere simultaneously. Evidence for this includes the cosmic microwave background radiation, the redshift of distant galaxies indicating expansion, and the observed abundance of light elements such as hydrogen and helium, all of which point to a universe that was once much smaller, hotter, and more uniform before cooling and forming structures through gravity over billions of years, with quantum fluctuations in the earliest moments acting as the seeds for galaxies and cosmic large-scale structure. While physics currently cannot definitively describe the exact initial state or cause, especially at the Planck time where general relativity and quantum mechanics intersect. In the Quran, the origin of the universe is described in language that is theological yet strikingly compatible with key conceptual elements of modern cosmology, such as Surah Al-Anbiya 21:30, which states, "Have those who disbelieved not considered that the heavens and the earth were a joined entity, and we separated them, and made from water every living thing? Then will they not believe," which classical commentators understood as a primordial unity later divided by divine command, and which modern readers often note aligns conceptually with an initial singular state followed by expansion and differentiation, though the Quran is not a science textbook and speaks in signs rather than equations. Further, Surah Fussilat 41:11 describes the early universe as dukhan, meaning smoke or gaseous matter, saying, "Then he turned to the heaven while it was smoke, and said to it and to the earth, 'Come willingly or unwillingly.' They said, 'We have come willingly,' which resonates with the scientific understanding that the early universe consisted of hot, diffuse plasma and gas before the formation of stars and galaxies. Additionally, the Quran repeatedly emphasizes intentionality and order in creation, as in Surah Al-Furqan 25:2, where God is described as having created everything and determined it with precise measure, a concept that parallels the finely tuned physical constants observed by physicists, while the Quran frames the beginning not merely as a physical event, but as a purposeful act, where time, causality, and existence itself begin by divine will, a perspective that philosophically complements the scientific view that time itself began with the universe, making the question of before the beginning physically undefined while still metaphysically meaningful within theology. The end of the universe, scientific and Quranic perspective. From a scientific standpoint, the end of the universe is not described with certainty, but with several competing models based on current observations, especially the accelerating expansion driven by dark energy. The most widely accepted scenario today is the heat death or big freeze, in which the universe continues expanding forever, galaxies drift farther apart. Star formation gradually ceases as gas is exhausted, existing stars burn out into white dwarfs, neutron stars, or black holes, and over unimaginably long timescales, even black holes evaporate via Hawking radiation, leaving a cold, dark, dilute universe approaching maximum entropy, where no meaningful work or complex structure can exist, essentially a cosmic fading into silence. Another possible scientific scenario is the Big Crunch, in which the expansion of the universe eventually reverses due to gravitational attraction, causing all matter and energy to collapse back into an extremely dense state similar to the beginning. Though current data suggests this is unlikely unless dark energy changes its behavior. A more extreme possibility is the Big Rip, where dark energy becomes increasingly dominant, eventually overcoming all fundamental forces, tearing apart galaxies, stars, planets, molecules, and even space-time itself in a finite future. While other speculative models include cyclic or bouncing universes where an end leads to a new beginning, though these remain highly theoretical. Crucially, science describes the end in terms of physical processes, entropy, thermodynamics, and space-time geometry, without purpose or moral dimension. And these predictions remain provisional, dependent on parameters still not fully understood, especially the true nature of dark energy and quantum gravity. In the Quran, the end of the universe is presented with profound certainty and vivid imagery, emphasizing total cosmic destruction followed by resurrection and judgment, repeatedly stressing that the end is not merely decay, but a deliberate and decisive act by God. Surah Al-Anbiya 21:104 states, "The day when we will fold the heaven like the folding of scroll for writings. As we began the first creation, we will repeat it, a promise binding upon us. Indeed, we will do it," which strikingly parallels the idea of space-time itself being folded or collapsed, evoking imagery reminiscent of modern cosmological models involving contraction or reconfiguration of the universe, and explicitly connects the end to a new beginning, suggesting cyclicity under divine will rather than eternal stagnation. Surah Az-Zumar 39-68 describes the blowing of the trumpet, after which all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth will fall unconscious, except whom Allah wills, indicating a sudden universal termination of life and order, followed by a second blast leading to resurrection, a concept that contrasts with gradual scientific endings by emphasizing abrupt cosmic intervention. Surah Al-Haqqah 69:13-16 describes the heavens being split apart and becoming fragile, while Surah Al-Qariyah and Surah Al-Taqwir use powerful language, such as star scattering, the sun being folded up, mountains crumbling, and seas boiling over, portraying a universe undergoing catastrophic transformation, imagery that resonates metaphorically with astrophysical processes like stellar death, gravitational collapse, and extreme energy release. Though framed symbolically for moral and spiritual impact, the Quran also emphasizes that the end of the universe is tied to accountability, as in Surah Al-Zalzala 99:1, where the earth releases its burdens and every atom's weight of good or evil is revealed, introducing an ethical dimension absent from scientific cosmology. Importantly, while science sees entropy increasing toward disorder, the Quran presents the apparent chaos of the end as a prelude to a higher order, where the universe is not abandoned to meaninglessness but reset under divine justice, with Surah Ibrahim 14:48 stating that the earth will be replaced by another earth and the heavens as well, implying a transformation of reality itself rather than mere annihilation. Philosophically, this Quranic worldview reframes the end not as ultimate death, but as transition, where physical laws as we know them are suspended or replaced, aligning intriguingly with the scientific acknowledgement that current laws may not apply at extreme conditions like singularities, while differing fundamentally. In asserting intentionality, consciousness, and moral resolution at the cosmic conclusion. Deep comparison, synthesis, and philosophical implications of the beginning and end of the universe in science and the Quran. When comparing the scientific and Quranic descriptions of the universe's beginning and end, it is crucial to recognize that they operate in different epistemological domains, while occasionally intersecting in conceptual space. Science seeks to explain how the universe behaves through observation, measurement, mathematical modeling, and falsifiable theories, whereas the Quran seeks to explain why existence exists at all, embedding cosmological descriptions within a moral, spiritual, and metaphysical framework. Yet despite these different aims, striking parallels emerge that invite reflection rather than simplistic equation. Regarding the beginning, science posits that the universe emerged from a singular state where space, time, matter, and energy were unified, and that physical laws, as we know them, crystallized only after expansion began, a conclusion supported by the fact that time itself appears to be a property of the universe rather than an external container. Similarly, the Quran repeatedly emphasizes that creation occurred by divine command be, and it is suggesting an origin that is not constrained by pre-existing time or matter, and implying that causation itself is contingent upon God's will, which aligns philosophically with the scientific realization that asking about physical causes before the Big Bang may be meaningless within space-time physics, though meaningful within metaphysics. The Quran's description of the heavens and the earth being once joined and then separated does not function as a technical account, but as a sign. Yet its conceptual compatibility with an initial unified state followed by expansion has led many Muslim scholars and scientists to view it as a remarkable correspondence, provided it is not forced into literal scientific equivalence. Classical tafsir did not interpret these verses in modern cosmological terms, which underscores an important methodological point that the Quran's language is deliberately flexible and timeless, capable of addressing multiple levels of understanding across eras, whereas scientific theories are provisional and subject to revision. On the matter of expansion, modern astronomy's discovery that galaxies are moving away from each other, implying an expanding universe, resonates with Surah 88 51:47, which states, "In the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed, we are expanding it," a verse often cited for its apparent alignment with contemporary findings, though again the Quran presents this as a sign of divine power rather than a quantitative measurement, reinforcing the idea that scientific discovery can deepen appreciation of revelation without redefining its primary purpose. Concerning the end of the universe, science offers scenarios rooted in thermodynamics and cosmological parameters, such as heat death, where entropy maximizes and usable energy vanishes, presenting a universe devoid of structure, life, or meaning, a conclusion that many philosophers find existentially troubling because it suggests that all complexity, consciousness, and value are temporary accidents destined for oblivion. In contrast, the Quran categorically rejects the notion of a meaningless end, asserting that cosmic dissolution is followed by resurrection, judgment, and a transformed reality, thereby embedding the universe within a narrative arc that includes origin, purpose, accountability, and culmination. The imagery of folding the heavens, extinguishing stars, and shattering mountains can be read not as literal astrophysical predictions, but as symbolic expressions of total systemic collapse, communicating to human consciousness that everything perceived as stable and eternal is in fact contingent and temporary. A message that mirrors modern science's revelation that stars die, galaxies collide, and even space-time may not be permanent. One profound point of convergence lies in the recognition of limits. Science acknowledges that it cannot yet explain the ultimate origin of physical laws or predict the final fate of the universe with certainty, while the Quran openly states that the exact timing and detailed mechanics of the end are known only to God, emphasizing epistemic humility. This shared acknowledgement challenges the arrogance of absolute certainty and invites a posture of wonder and restraint. However, a key divergence emerges in the role of consciousness and morality. In science, the universe evolves without intention, and human meaning is self-generated within an indifferent cosmos, whereas in the Quran, the universe is a deliberate creation in which human consciousness plays a central role as a moral agent, and cosmic events are not random, but purposeful signs pointing toward ethical responsibility. This difference leads to radically different existential conclusions, even when observational data overlaps. From a philosophical perspective, the Quranic worldview can be seen as answering questions that science deliberately brackets out, such as why there is something rather than nothing, why the laws of nature are ordered and intelligible, and why moral intuition exists, while science excels at explaining the mechanisms through which physical processes unfold once existence is given. Importantly, conflicts arise not from the data itself, but from metaphysical interpretations imposed upon it, such as scientism, which claims that science is the only valid source of truth, or literalism, which treats symbolic scripture as technical manuals. When these extremes are avoided, a complementary relationship becomes possible, where science explores the how of creation and the Quran addresses the why, without either undermining the other. The concept of repetition, emphasized in the Quranic statement that creation will be repeated as it began, invites intriguing dialogue with modern speculative physics, such as cyclic universes, quantum gravity models, or multiverse theories. Not because the Quran predicts these theories, but because it allows for a reality far more complex and dynamic than a single linear trajectory ending in emptiness. Ultimately, the synthesis of scientific and Quranic perspectives suggests that the universe is both intelligible and meaningful, governed by discoverable laws, yet oriented toward a transcendent purpose, and that human beings, as products of cosmic evolution and recipients of revelation, occupy a unique position where understanding the universe becomes an act of both intellectual inquiry and spiritual reflection. Human existence, time, free will, and accountability within the cosmic framework of science and the Quran. When the discussion of the universe's beginning and end is extended to include human existence, the contrast and complementarity between scientific and Quranic worldviews become even more pronounced, because humans are both observers of the cosmos and participants within it. Scientifically, human beings are understood as the product of cosmic evolution, arising from the same physical processes that govern stars and galaxies, with atoms forged in stellar interiors, molecules forming through chemistry, life emerging through complex biochemical pathways, and consciousness arising from neural activity in the brain, making humanity a late and fragile outcome of billions of years of natural processes governed by physical laws, genetic inheritance, and environmental pressures, where time is linear, flowing from past to future, and free will is often debated as either an emergent illusion or a constrained capacity shaped by biology and causality. From this scientific perspective, humans have no privileged cosmic status, occupying a small planet around an average star in an ordinary galaxy, and yet paradoxically possessing the ability to comprehend the universe on vast scales, which has led some scientists and philosophers to describe consciousness as the universe becoming aware of itself, though this awareness carries no inherent moral mandate within science itself, leaving questions of meaning, purpose, and accountability to philosophy, culture, or individual construction. In contrast, the Quran places human beings at the moral center of the cosmic narrative, not in terms of physical size or power, but in terms of responsibility and consciousness, repeatedly stating that humans were created intentionally, endowed with intellect and moral awareness, and entrusted with stewardship on earth, as expressed in Surah Al-Baqarah 230, where God announces the placing of a Khalifa, or trustee, on earth, which reframes human existence not as an accident, but as a trust, situating human life within a universe that is purposeful and ethically charged. Time, in the Quranic worldview, is not merely a physical dimension, but a moral arena, where moments are opportunities for choice, accountability, and growth, and where the apparent linear flow of time in this world is embedded within a larger, non-linear divine perspective, as suggested by verses stating that a day with God could be like 1,000 or 50,000 years by human reckoning, implying that time itself is relative and contingent, a notion that intriguingly resonates with Einstein's relativity, which demonstrates scientifically that time is not absolute, but dependent on motion and gravity, even though the Quran arrives at this insight through revelation rather than measurement. Free will forms a crucial bridge between cosmology and ethics in the Quran, as humans are described as possessing the ability to choose between right and wrong, while still existing within divine knowledge and decree, a tension that Islamic theology has long grappled with, emphasizing that divine foreknowledge does not negate human responsibility, just as knowledge of an outcome does not cause the action itself. This stands in contrast to strict physical determinism, which argues that all events, including human decisions, are the inevitable result of prior states of matter and energy, though modern physics complicates this picture by introducing quantum indeterminacy, suggesting that at fundamental levels, outcomes are probabilistic rather than strictly determined, reopening philosophical space for non-deterministic interpretations of reality without automatically proving free will. The Quran repeatedly links cosmic order with moral order, arguing that just as the universe operates according to balance and measure, human life is meant to operate according to justice and restraint, and that corruption in human behavior leads to imbalance on earth, as stated in Surah Ar-Rum 30:41, where corruption on land and sea is attributed to what human hands have earned, a verse that gains contemporary relevance when viewed alongside scientific warnings about environmental degradation, climate change, and ecological collapse caused by human activity, showing how moral failure can produce physical consequences within the natural world. Accountability in the Quran is inseparable from the end of the universe, as the collapse of the cosmos is presented as the necessary precondition for judgment, where time as we know it ends and a new mode of existence begins, in which actions are weighed with perfect justice, down to the smallest detail, reinforcing the idea that nothing in human experience is ultimately insignificant. This sharply contrasts with the scientific picture of an eventual heat death, where all records of human existence would be erased by entropy, leading to the philosophical problem of whether meaning can be objective if all traces vanish, a question that science alone cannot resolve. Yet, even within science, the human drive to seek truth, explore origins, and predict endings suggests an innate orientation toward meaning that transcends survival, raising questions about why a universe governed solely by blind processes would produce beings capable of contemplating eternity, morality, and transcendence. Questions the Quran answers by asserting that humans are created with fitra, an innate disposition toward recognizing truth and the divine. In this integrated view, scientific cosmology describes the stage, the laws, and the timeline of the universe, while the Quran provides the narrative, the purpose, and the moral direction, with human beings positioned as conscious actors whose choices echo beyond their brief physical lifespan into a reality that extends beyond the death of the cosmos itself. Doubts, objections, misinterpretations, and the limits of reading science in a scripture. A serious discussion of scientific and Quranic perspectives on the universe must confront common doubts and objections honestly, because confusion often arises not from the ideas themselves, but from how they are interpreted, exaggerated, or misused. One major objection raised by critics is that aligning Quranic verses with modern cosmology is an exercise in retrofitting, where believers read contemporary scientific discoveries back into ancient texts, selectively highlighting similarities while ignoring differences, and this criticism has weight when verses are treated as precise scientific predictions rather than symbolic signs, a mistake that can undermine both scientific integrity and theological depth. Classical Islamic scholarship did not interpret verses about the heavens, smoke, or separation in technical cosmological terms, because the Quran's primary audience was moral and spiritual, not scientific, and forcing the text into modern frameworks risks reducing its universality to the lifespan of current theories, which history shows are always subject to revision. For example, if future cosmology replaces the Big Bang with a radically different model, tying faith too tightly to one, scientific narrative could create unnecessary crises of belief, which is why many scholars emphasize that the Quran invites reflection on nature without claiming to replace empirical investigation. Another objection comes from scientific materialism, which argues that invoking God to explain the universe's origin or end is a God-of-the-gaps approach, filling unknowns with divine agency until science catches up. However, this criticism misunderstands the Quranic claim, because God in Islamic theology is not an explanation competing with physical causes, but the ground of existence itself, meaning that even a complete scientific account of the universe's origin would not negate the theological question of why there is a lawful, intelligible universe at all rather than nothing. Just as understanding how ink forms letters does not explain why a meaningful message exists. On the opposite extreme, some believers misuse scientific language to claim that the Quran contains all knowledge explicitly, turning verses into rigid scientific statements and dismissing empirical evidence when it appears to conflict with literal readings, an approach that historically has led to stagnation and conflict, whereas the Quran itself repeatedly urges observation, reflection, and humility, acknowledging that human knowledge is limited and partial. A particularly sensitive area is eschatology, where Quranic descriptions of the end of the universe are often dismissed by skeptics as mythological or pre-scientific, yet such criticism overlooks the fact that science itself relies heavily on metaphor when dealing with phenomena beyond everyday experience, using terms like fabric of space-time, cosmic inflation, and vacuum energy, none of which are directly observable in ordinary human terms. Quranic imagery of folding heavens, scattered stars, and boiling seas can thus be understood as metaphors communicating total systemic collapse in language accessible to all generations, rather than failed attempts at astrophysics. Another doubt arises around the apparent conflict between divine decree and human free will, especially when the universe is described as finely tuned and predetermined, leading some to argue that moral accountability becomes meaningless if everything unfolds according to divine plan. Islamic theology responds by distinguishing between knowledge and causation, asserting that God's knowledge of future events does not force human choices, just as observing an event does not cause it, a philosophical distinction that remains debated but is not logically incoherent, and which interestingly parallels modern discussions in physics about predictability versus determinism. A further objection concerns the problem of suffering and cosmic indifference, where critics ask why a universe created with purpose would involve vast scales of destruction, extinction, and apparent waste, with countless stars and galaxies seemingly irrelevant to human moral drama. The Quran addresses this indirectly by reframing human perspective, emphasizing that limited human understanding cannot encompass the totality of divine wisdom, and that apparent excess or destruction may serve purposes beyond immediate comprehension, while also affirming that moral justice is not confined to this physical world, but completed beyond it, a claim science cannot verify or falsify because it lies outside empirical scope. Importantly, the Quran does not ask for blind acceptance, but challenges readers to think, question, and reflect, repeatedly asking whether people will not reason, observe, or understand, which undermines the idea that faith and critical inquiry are incompatible. Historically, this openness contributed to the flourishing of scientific thought in the Islamic world, where scholars studied astronomy, physics, and mathematics as acts of understanding creation rather than threats to belief. The most balanced approach, therefore, recognizes clear boundaries. Science explains mechanisms within the universe, while the Quran provides meaning, purpose, and ethical orientation, and when overlaps occur, they should be approached with intellectual humility rather than triumphalism. Ultimately, doubts and objections need not weaken faith or science. When engaged sincerely, they refine understanding, prevent dogmatism, and deepen appreciation for both the vastness of the cosmos and the depth of the questions it raises, allowing the universe's beginning and end to be seen not as battlegrounds between belief and reason, but as shared frontiers of human wonder and inquiry. Final integrated reflection on meaning, destiny, and the human position between the beginning and the end of the universe. When all the strands of scientific cosmology and Quranic worldview are brought together, a comprehensive picture emerges in which the universe is not merely a physical system evolving from an initial state toward a final condition, but a vast context within which questions of meaning, destiny, and responsibility become unavoidable for conscious beings. Scientifically, humans occupy a fleeting moment in a 13.8 billion year timeline, living in a universe that existed long before them and will continue long after, governed by impersonal laws that operate with astonishing consistency, producing galaxies, stars, life, and eventually decay, a picture that inspires awe but also existential unease, because it suggests that everything we value is temporary and cosmically insignificant. Yet paradoxically, this same universe has produced minds capable of understanding its history, predicting its future, and questioning its purpose, a fact that remains deeply mysterious even within science. The Quran responds to this tension by reframing insignificance not in terms of size or duration, but in terms of meaning, asserting that value is not derived from spatial scale or temporal permanence, but from consciousness, intention, and moral choice, and that a single human life, though physically small, carries immense weight because it is lived in awareness and freedom within a purposeful creation. In this view, the beginning of a universe is not just a physical origin, but the opening of a moral arena, and the end of the universe is not merely a thermodynamic outcome, but the closure of that arena, where justice, truth, and accountability are fully realized. The cosmos becomes a stage, not in the sense of artificiality, but in the sense of coherence, where physical laws provide stability and predictability, allowing moral agents to exist, act, and be held responsible. Time, which science treats as a dimension intertwined with space and affected by gravity and motion, becomes in the Quran a precious resource, a limited trust that flows irreversibly toward an appointed end, making every moment significant, because once time ends, choice ends, and only consequence remains. A notion that adds existential urgency to human life without negating the beauty and curiosity celebrated by scientific exploration. The Quran's repeated emphasis on signs in the heavens and the earth invites humans to study the universe not as detached observers, but as engaged participants, where learning about cosmic origins and destinies becomes an act of self-understanding, because the same laws that govern galaxies also govern the atoms within us. And the same temporality that leads stars to die leads human lives toward death, making reflection on the cosmos inseparable from reflection on mortality. From this integrated perspective, scientific knowledge does not diminish faith, but sharpens it, because understanding the vast scales, delicate balances, and deep history of the universe can intensify awareness of contingency and dependence, while faith does not obstruct science, but contextualizes it, preventing knowledge from collapsing into nihilism by situating facts within a larger narrative of purpose. The end of the universe, whether imagined scientifically as heat death or cosmically through Quranic imagery of collapse and renewal, functions psychologically and philosophically as a mirror for the individual end of life, reminding humans that permanence in the physical world is an illusion and that clinging solely to material continuity is ultimately unsatisfying. While the Quran's insistence on resurrection and transformation asserts that endings are not annihilations, but transitions, a claim that cannot be proven by science yet speaks directly to human intuition about justice and meaning. Importantly, this worldview does not require rejecting scientific uncertainty. Rather, it embraces it, recognizing that not knowing the exact fate of the universe mirrors not knowing the precise timing of death or the final hour, reinforcing humility and discouraging arrogance, whether intellectual or moral. In this sense, the universe's beginning teaches dependence, its vastness teaches humility, its order teaches discipline, and its end teaches accountability, forming a coherent ethical and existential framework that science alone cannot supply but can richly inform. The human being stands, therefore, between dust and destiny, composed of the same elements as stars, yet capable of moral reflection, living between a beginning they did not choose and an end they cannot avoid, but possessing the freedom to choose how that interval is lived, a freedom that gives meaning to knowledge, action, and belief. In the final synthesis, science tells us that we are made of stardust and governed by laws, while the Quran tells us that we are entrusted with choice and destined for return, and together these perspectives suggest that to understand the universe fully is not only to measure it, but to ask what kind of beings we ought to be within it, from its first moment to its last.